Welcome to the deep dive. Our goal here is simple. Cut through the noise, give you the key insights so you can be genuinely well-informed. Today, we are digging into a whole stack of sources on immigration policy. And we're kicking off with some pretty immediate news. Just yesterday, September 5th, 2025, reports came out about a big immigration enforcement action down in Georgia. A raid at a Hyundai plant, 475 people detained. Now, our sources aren't just treating this as a headline. They're pointing to it as, a real, tangible example of enforcement happening now. And according to these same sources, this situation is, well, a world away from what they describe under the prior administration. Many of them called that period the worst border invasion in history. Oh. Back then, monthly border encounters reportedly shot up to 350,000, which is just a massive number. But the story from these sources really shifts for the current administration. They talk about stricter policies being enforced, and as a result, daily border crossings have apparently dropped way down to just 300 a day.
Right, a really dramatic shift according to these sources.
Exactly. And they stress this isn't some accident or external factor. It's seen in this view as a direct result of deliberate policy decisions, which leads to this powerful, maybe concerning idea. What if the chaos at our border wasn't just accidental, but a calculated erosion of our nation's sovereignty? How do our sources explore that claim?
That's really the core question we're diving into today. We'll explore how a nation's ability to control its borders is framed by many of our sources as just fundamental, absolutely key to its sovereignty. We'll look at policies that proponents say are designed to boost national security, protect taxpayers, uphold the rule of law. We're drawing from sources that mostly emphasize consistent enforcement, so you'll get a clearer sense of the principles they say are guiding these efforts and the big impacts of both strict and, well, more lenient approaches on Americans and legal immigrants, all based on the perspectives in our material.
Okay, let's unpack that foundational idea then. This link between border control and being a nation. Our sources often bring up President Ronald Reagan. He famously said, "A nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation." That sentiment really seems to underpin a lot of the conservative thinking on this.
It does. And it's not just, a soundbite. It connects to real concerns laid out by groups like the Heritage Foundation, a major conservative voice. And what's interesting is how they frame it. They argue uncontrolled illegal immigration isn't just like an inconvenience or a drain on resources. No, they say it puts huge costs onto taxpayers, onto state and local governments. And crucially, they argue it risks national security, public safety, and the rule of law itself.
So maintaining order is paramount in that view.
Exactly. For them, having a lawful, orderly, and manageable system means you have to clearly distinguish between legal and illegal immigration. It's about prioritizing, in their view, American citizens and those following the legal path.
Okay, so let's get specific about enforcement, the physical border wall. This wasn't exactly invented recently, was it? Our sources point out Congress actually authorized border fencing decades back. The Secure Fence Act of 2006, that's a key one they mention, it passed the Senate 80-19. Think about that, bipartisan support, including votes from people like Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein back then.
Right. That's important context.
Definitely. Then the Trump administration took that existing idea and really pushed hard on construction. Sources say over 100 miles of new barrier went up by January 2020. They even declared a national emergency, remember, to move $8.1 billion for it after Congress only gave about $1.5 billion initially. That really shows the urgency they, or at least the sources describing them, felt.
And going hand in hand with the physical barrier was another really talked about policy. The Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, or as most people know it, remain in Mexico. This started in 2019. Proponents, as our sources describe them, called it highly successful. Basically, it meant non-Mexican asylum seekers coming through Mexico had to wait in Mexico for their U.S. court dates.
So shifting the waiting room, essentially.
Pretty much. And the argument from supporters was that this discouraged what they called fraudulent claims, people just trying to get in and disappear, knowing the courts were backed up. They said it tied up fewer U.S. resources. The policy returned about 60,000 people to wait in Mexico, and the Supreme Court did uphold it back in March 2020. Now, it's fair to say this policy caused a lot of debate about humanitarian issues, which critics really focused on, though our sources today emphasize the enforcement angle more.
Okay, now this next part is, well, pretty striking according to the sources. The issue of fraud in what they call family unit claims. One DHS official highlighted a staggering 469% jump in these family apprehensions in just 9 months of fiscal year 2019. That's huge. So they launched pilot DNA testing programs. And the results, according to these reports, stark, found almost 20% of the supposed families tested weren't actually related.
20% is a significant number.
It is. And by August 2019, DHS said they'd found 6,000 people who'd falsely claimed family ties. They even cited cases of people literally renting or buying kids to get across the border more easily.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Department of Justice responded. April 2020, they put in a rule. DNA samples required from everyone detained. The goal was clearly to deter this kind of deception.
And that focus on deception didn't stop there. It also extended to what the Trump administration called birth tourism. This is, the practice of people coming to the U.S. just to give birth so the child gets automatic U.S. citizenship. The administration saw this as basically gaming the system, a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment citizenship clause.
Right, the subject to the jurisdiction part.
Exactly. They took action, too. In 2019, there were criminal indictments against 19 people running these birth tourism agencies, apparently making millions. And then in 2020, the State Department brought in a policy to deny temporary visitor visas if the main reason for travel seemed to be giving birth for citizenship purposes. They cited national security and protecting taxpayer resources as the reasons. And this really gets to a fundamental debate that critics of universal birthright citizenship raise. They look at that 14th Amendment phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and argue it's been stretched too far. They point to history, like the Elk versus Wilkins case in 1884. The Supreme Court back then said an American Indian wasn't automatically a citizen because, due to tribal allegiance, he wasn't fully subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S.
Interesting historical context.
Right. And they also mentioned the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which granted citizenship later. They argue this shows the original understanding wasn't that everyone born here automatically got citizenship, regardless of their parents' legal status or allegiance. So this view suggests children of, say, illegal immigrants or temporary visitors might not automatically qualify, according to these sources. It's a controversial interpretation, but one strongly pushed in the materials we reviewed.
Okay, let's shift to legal immigration programs. Our sources highlight some major changes there too, especially the refugee program under the Trump administration. Big cuts to the annual ceilings. It went from 110,000 in FY 2017 under Obama, way down to just 18,000 by FY 2020.
That's a massive reduction.
Huge. And the stated reason, according to the administration sources, it was about shifting resources. They pointed to that huge asylum backlog building up at the southwest border, and also ongoing concerns about security vetting, especially from conflict zones. Plus, they added a new requirement. State and local governments had to be consulted before refugees were resettled in their areas, giving locals more say, essentially.
The administration also looked closely at other pathways, like parole and H-1B visas. Parole first, that's a tool allowing temporary entry for people usually inadmissible, maybe for urgent humanitarian reasons. What our sources emphasize here is an effort to stop what they term systemic and deliberate abuse of parole from the past. The push was to use it strictly case by case, only for truly urgent humanitarian needs or significant public benefit, not, for whole categories of people.
Heightening the criteria.
Right. And then for H-1B visas, those are for highly skilled foreign workers. They implemented reforms under the banner of Buy American and Hire American. This meant doing things like getting rid of deference memos, which had made extensions easier, and prioritizing workers with advanced degrees. There was also that proclamation in June 2020 temporarily halting new H-1B entries, explicitly to, as they stated, protect American jobs during the COVID recovery.
Another really critical area, according to our sources, was the immigration court system itself. It was just drowning in cases, a backlog of 1.1 million cases. That's a huge bottleneck.
Absolutely paralyzing for the system.
So the administration laid out a plan. More judges, they increased the number from 338 up to 489 by 2020. More members on the Board of Immigration Appeals, too, from 17 to 23. And this was seen as crucial because, get this, judge productivity had apparently dropped by 31% between 2006 and 2015.
Wow, fewer cases completed per judge.
Exactly. So they brought in a new policy, basically a performance standard. Judges were expected to complete 700 cases a year, trying to speed things up and clear that backlog.
And that ties directly into another challenge, what our sources call sanctuary jurisdictions. Cities, counties, even states that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, basically refusing to help enforce federal law. The Trump administration, as our sources detail, really pushed back on this. There's that 2017 executive order trying to withhold federal grants from these places. We also saw moves like suspending trusted traveler programs, think global entry for states like New York, because they were restricting DHS access to DMV records.
So using federal leverage.
Precisely. The core argument you hear from these sources is that sanctuary policies don't protect communities, they create sanctuaries for criminals. They argue it endangers public safety and fundamentally undermines the rule of law by blocking federal officers from doing their jobs.
Okay, but when you have this kind of broad, intense enforcement, questions come up about mistakes, about individuals getting caught in the net wrongly. Our sources do mention some really concerning reports. U.S. citizens being detained, sometimes even deported. There was the case of Juan Carlos Lopez Gomez, a 20-year-old citizen held for 24 hours by ICE even though he had ID, or VML, a 2-year-old citizen removed with her mother. These stories are troubling. How do the sources address this?
That's a really important point to raise, and the sources we looked at do acknowledge these incidents happen. Generally, though, they frame them as regrettable but rare errors within a massive system. They often stress that U.S. citizen kids aren't technically deported. It's usually the non-citizen parents choosing to take them along when removed. Then these sources pivot. They argue that while these mistakes are awful and should be avoided, they have to be weighed against what they describe as the significant, widespread harm done to American citizens by illegal immigration overall. They list things like downward pressure on wages for low-skilled workers, higher housing costs, strains on schools and hospitals, and they bring up crime stats too, like a Texas report cited showing 202,000 illegal immigrants charged with nearly 500,000 offenses over a period. They see that as a major public safety issue.
So a difficult balancing act from their perspective.
Very much so. From this viewpoint, the need to secure the border and address these broader societal costs, sometimes tragically, but necessarily in their view, outweighs the risk of these individual errors. And they also reiterate, legally, ICE can detain someone until their status is confirmed.
All right, let's shift focus to the more recent past. Our sources paint the Biden administration's approach as a complete U-turn, a radical departure. They use strong language accusing the administration of intentionally blurring the lines, erasing the distinction between legal and illegal immigration. According to critics cited in our material, this directly caused what they term the worst border invasion in its history. The claim is that Border Patrol's role was essentially turned into, and this is a quote from a source, a welcome center, a daycare, and glorified Uber drivers.
And this narrative extends beyond just government action. Our sources talk about something they call the border industrial complex. This refers to what they label open borders organizations, often NGOs, non-governmental organizations, many receiving government funds, which, these sources allege, actively facilitated mass illegal migration.
Facilitated how?
Well, the claim is significant funding flowed that way. One source estimates the Biden administration directed perhaps $6 billion towards a network of UN agencies and hundreds of NGOs involved in this area. And they cite alleged activities like providing false residency papers, advising undocumented individuals to lie to officials, even, according to these sources, documented cases of non-citizens getting registered to vote.
Those are serious allegations.
They are. And it suggests, from this critical perspective, a whole ecosystem working, intentionally or not, to enable and encourage illegal immigration. Of course, it's vital to say those organizations and the administration itself would almost certainly describe their work very differently, likely focusing on humanitarian aid, processing asylum seekers legally, and upholding international norms. But the sources we're discussing today focus heavily on these criticisms.
And all of this just fuels the intense political division, doesn't it? Our sources remind us, back in December 2023, Senate Republicans blocked that major aid package for Ukraine and Israel. Why? They demanded significant changes to border policy first.
Right, a clear sign of how central this issue is and how gridlocked Congress remains. Legislation like H.R. 2, which aims to tighten things up significantly from a conservative standpoint, hasn't been able to pass.
So where do proponents of stricter enforcement see things going? What's the path forward from their perspective?
Well, looking ahead, the Heritage Foundation, for instance, lays out a pretty clear roadmap in the materials we reviewed. They want what they call a lawful and efficient immigration system. Their recommendations, things like continued border security, obviously, and consistent enforcement of the laws already on the books, prioritizing U.S. citizens and legal immigrants in the system. Also, formally ending birthright citizenship, they see it as a major pull factor. Modernizing enforcement using more tech, more science, preparing for pushback, expecting that cartels will fight back against tougher enforcement.
And empowering states.
Yes, empowering states more, but also specifically prohibiting federal money from going to those organizations they label as open borders organizations. It's a comprehensive vision for, from their perspective, reasserting national control.
So as we've heard today, this whole debate over immigration, it really goes deep. According to our sources, it's not just about border lines on a map. It touches on the definition of the nation itself: community safety, economic prosperity. The data presented in these sources certainly suggests a link, a clear correlation between strong enforcement actions and lower numbers of illegal crossings. It really
Huh.
makes you think, doesn't it? If executive actions can swing those numbers so dramatically, what does that tell us about the underlying political will, or lack thereof, to enforce existing laws and uphold national sovereignty?
And that leaves a really important question for you, our listener, to consider. How do we, as a society, find that balance? Balancing compassion, which many feel strongly about, with what these sources argue is the fundamental right, the necessity of a nation to secure its borders, protect its citizens, and ensure the rule of law consistently prevails, especially when faced with such different views on what that balance should even look like.